Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome back to On Your Mental. This is the podcast that shares candid, open, and sometimes vulnerable conversations between and about men. I'm going to rattle a few things off real quick here. Today's episode, emotional vulnerability. Before I get started, thank you to everybody who left comments and left questions in our DM last week after the episode about feeling burnt out. We got some good stuff to work on for future episodes. And if you're not already, please make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. If you are listening to this, follow the podcast. If you like things, like it, leave a rating on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, whatever. But I hope you all enjoy this week's episode, and I'll see you in a moment when it starts. Peace. You have great posture every episode.
Every time I look at the video, I'm like, I don't know. I just don't like the way
I just think it's
Is it too casual?
I think it's not casual. Ditch the sock.
Exactly. No, I'm not gonna. I think last time we were doing it, I wasn't wearing socks, and I remember like
might be right.
hiding my foot under my leg.
Yeah. But I think the shots were like
Ditch the shirt while you're at it too.
Yeah. We're getting started with the first nude episode of On Your Mental. Welcome back, Derek, Gerard. Welcome back, Jesse. This is Jesse's first time in season 3 being on the podcast. That's
welcome back, Cabs.
Somewhat true. Welcome back. We'll get to you. I want to get to you,
Come on, man.
I want to get to you.
Finish.
I'll finish on you, man. All right. We got Jess. We actually did film an episode. It didn't come out. It's in the bank, though.
Oh.
For a rainy day.
Whoa.
Because you know, sometimes,
only.
Yeah, for you Patreon subscribers to subscribe to my non-existent Patreon. Jess, welcome. Derek, welcome back.
Thank you.
Cabs, welcome back from Miami.
Hey.
Last time you were here, you were just on the FaceTime.
I was, yeah.
You feeling better?
Oh, way better. Yeah. Now it's just allergies.
Oh, okay.
Fuck. Yes.
It's starting allergy season.
No. Fuck no. Yeah, my allergies suck.
They just get worse every year too.
That's a
shitty.
thing, by the way.
Global warming. Apparently. Whoa. Are you about to say that's not a thing?
That's not a thing.
And your body develops immunities to the medication. That's why I got to switch from Reactin to Claritin, because it doesn't work 2 years in a row.
Your guys' allergies are bad enough to use medicine?
And I take a nasal spray too.
Damn.
I tried the nasal spray too. It helps a little bit, I think.
I never had allergies growing up. They started 3 years ago.
Yeah, mine
which
too.
is just the worst. As an adult, I feel like I'm just this is the worst thing ever. To now have to deal with allergies.
I'd never heard of that.
I feel like you grow
That
out of
happened to me.
Yeah,
Really?
Mine developed 3-4 years ago too.
Whoa. New strains, bro.
New strains. It's the GMOs.
Dude, I had allergies before they were cool, okay?
Okay. Miami was good. You've just been away. Y'all are going away. And so I wanted to ask you about that before we get started on today's episode. For everybody listening and watching, today we're going to be talking about emotional vulnerability, and we'll get into some good questions about that. And it's funny that we actually bring this up. I don't think we've had a direct episode about this yet, because in every intro I say sometimes vulnerable conversations between and about men, but we've never directly talked about what vulnerability looks like amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
So I think that'll be fun. But before we get started with the topic, I wanted to hear about your upcoming trip. So if you want to tell us a little bit.
Derek and I
Okay.
eloped.
Okay, that's enough.
It's a shotgun wedding.
We don't need to talk about it too much, but it's just we got this trip planned to LA. Me, Derek, Jez Paul, and Joseph. We're going to rip down and
Yeah, we're driving.
in the podcast mobile.
Yeah, I want to go down to film a couple TikTok interviews with people that aren't here.
Sick.
And then I was like, I don't want to. I drove to San Francisco alone a couple months ago, and it's fucking hard. So I'm like, I know the boys. I know Jesse and Joe are down for literally anything.
Yeah.
So, and it would be a lot more fun too. So yeah, I'm stoked.
Sounds like it'd be a good time.
We're
How
calling
long
it-
is the drive, by the way?
To LA.
On Google Maps.
LA is 23 hours.
Fuck.
But San
No,
Francisco,
really?
San Francisco's 17. So you drive to San Francisco first.
Is that
Right.
the long way or the short way? 17 hours.
That's the long way.
Okay. And we're doing the long way. The Oregon coast. Have
Go
you ever heard
long.
of
Yeah,
the Oregon coast?
yeah,
Apparently
yeah.
it's just you don't, if you're going down there, don't miss it. It's way better to just take the long way. Otherwise it's just I-5, which is apparently not as nice.
No.
Just getting across the border. That's once you get across the border, then it's smooth sailing. That's the only thing. I get so much anxiety crossing the border.
Why?
Because every time they want to just fuck with me.
Yeah.
And especially
If you bring the van.
Yeah. No, the last time I went in the van, it was fine. They didn't even check the van. Like I was saying, like I have a little compartment in the back. I could have fit an entire Mexican family in there, like, and I could just across the border.
Coming from Canada.
What are they doing?
I just chose a random race. That wasn't. I know. But like every time, when you go across and they ask you what your job is, if you say you do social media, they love asking you questions, and then they automatically assume that you're gonna go there to work.
Sure.
Especially if you have a camera anywhere, they're like, "Oh, what's this?" And it's like, I want to take photos. I don't fucking know. But it'll be fine.
Four weirdos in a van driving across the border.
We got
I'd
two.
flag it.
We have 2 entire white people in the van.
Yes.
Should be able to carry the rest.
Oh, like between the combinations, you mean?
We got one here,
Right.
and then
Half.
Joseph, yeah.
Joe.
Joe's got to be driving for sure.
Yo, 100%. We're gonna have cowboy
day,
hats on.
If he's in the back, they're probably gonna be like, "Did they kidnap this innocent white man?"
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you guys have a lot of fun.
Thanks, bro.
And I hope you get some good TikToks on the way. For people who haven't seen Derek's TikTok, Jesse also has a TikTok, but Derek does a little podcast on TikTok. It's only on TikTok, which is kind of cool. And a lot of people in the comments, I was saying earlier before we filmed, they'll like to point out, well, where can I see the full thing?
Yeah.
It's on TikTok.
It's on
It doesn't
TikTok.
fucking go anywhere else. Anywho, today, since we're talking about emotional vulnerability, I wanted to first get a sense of how vulnerable we all think we are. And I thought we'd do a little quick activity to do this.
Is this the first activity?
This is the first activity on the
First activity on your mental.
I don't even need to edit this stuff.
Please leave that in. If that gets cut out, I'm gonna be so upset.
It's there. It's there. You'll notice, check under your seats. I'm just kidding.
Oh,
fuck. Underneath here, I have a little chart. Jesse, do you mind grabbing that? Just because now I'm holding something. Well, don't even worry about it. I'm going to put it on the screen. Like, I'll take a photo of it afterwards.
Okay, cool.
Wonderful chart here. And the chart reads, for people who are listening, it's a little single line graph. And on one end of the graph, we've got closed off. On the other end of the graph, we have completely vulnerable. And I'd like us all to kind of place a little dot or a star or whatever. This is also a way for me to get all of your autographs in case any of us are ever really making it. This is getting sold ASAP.
Dude, I've practiced my signature so many times.
So I'd like you to put a little dot or star or whatever, and then also sign your name underneath it so that I can sell that later, but also so we identify who it
I'm going to
was.
scribble over it.
Can I start?
You can start, Jesse.
Can we place it in spit? Be worth a lot more.
How about blood?
Blood pack?
Is this,
Blood
are we
bag.
being serious? Like,
This is being
we're
serious.
trying
I'd like you to
dive
take
deep.
this
What
as
kind of question is
seriously as
that?
possible.
Are we trying to dive deep here?
We're trying to reflect on yourself a little bit. Think about how emotionally vulnerable you
And
are.
it's not a competition, guys.
It is not a competition. I want you to be real.
I have so much energy here. Would you guys? Can I have like a moment just to like?
Sounds like
center
Jesse didn't
myself
read the
here a
questions.
little bit?
Whoa.
That says closed off.
Shut your.
Fun fact, Jesse reads at a grade 3 level.
Shut the fuck up.
Completely vulnerable.
And me being your friend, Jess, I will call bullshit.
Oh sure, 100%.
Or maybe get
I
you to
expected you.
expand, and I think that's the more respectable thing to do.
Should I use a
Are we
different
also
color?
using-
Respectful?
Yeah,
Yes, please. I've brought and prepared. Thank you,
I'll have
Kabir.
red,
Brought a blue
please.
pen.
Actually,
You're
I'm
wearing green. Let's go with green.
Um,
Got a couple green.
Do you want
guys
to
on the
draw
pod.
like? Do you want to draw like a exact point? Just I don't want to say that I'm more or less.
like a range.
You can do a range.
I can.
That's my blue pen.
on a good, on a good day?
Derek.
I'll just initial.
Oh, come on. How much? What am I gonna get for that? Like 5 cents on the dollar?
You're already making $70 a month on this podcast. Okay, you make enough money.
Buddy, it was $70 in about 3 months.
That sounds about right.
Boom.
Oh, you gave yourself a range too?
I'm not going to do a
Is
range
the,
if you're doing a range.
Does it go any further than? Is there?
You
Off the charts.
took me a
I just
minute to realize
write it on the wall.
You can't do a range.
And don't think about what they've written.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fuck off. No screen peeking.
Wait. For this chart, are we like? Is this emotionally vulnerable with ourselves or towards others?
Towards others, kind of like how much you would
Alright.
you would share.
I want to change my answer.
Dude, where was this information when we were?
Bro.
I'm just kidding.
No, it's fine.
I'll just do a general.
I think it was just general.
Okay.
Vulnerability, as we understand it, without
Yeah.
diving too deep. Where are we on that scale?
I would say that my answer from me from like 8 months ago would be completely different.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I feel like these charts probably do change over time.
Yeah.
Cabs, I would have put you even lower
Yeah.
like 3 years ago.
You should save this, and then in a year we do this again.
Whoa.
And we see where it is. Maybe one of us like went off the deep end and just like went all the way the opposite direction.
Like we get our heart broken by a girl.
Yeah. No, I never want to talk to women again. Just join like an incel community online.
Do you join community? I think that's called 4chan.
And then Reddit, 4chan.
They're all.
There's incels everywhere,
The
bro.
thing is, I like Reddit. Anyways. I'll show this to you all, and again, everybody who's watching, I will just put this up on the screen. I'll take a picture of this afterwards. I'll use this as a reminder too. Y'all can check this out and see where we're all at. I'm ahead of you there, Jess, to make a point.
I love it.
I'm ahead of you. You too, Derek.
Fuck.
And
Such
we're
a
all
loser.
We're all further down the chart than Cabs.
I think I'm ahead of you guys, actually.
You know
If you think
what's
about
crazy?
it that way.
Him putting himself back there is pretty emotionally vulnerable.
Pretty emotionally vulnerable.
So bump him up a couple spots just for doing it.
You got white out?
Mhm.
every time I rewrite it after moving out.
You rewriting it is also moving up.
Okay.
This is all so vulnerable.
So how are we going to interpret this?
So the
data?
purpose of this exercise, one, is to just point at the fact that everybody has their own sense of vulnerability. And when you're thinking about, I mean, Cabs just asking a question about how should I interpret this question might point to how you think about vulnerability in general, right?
yeah.
You might be a little more reserved in the way that you want to think about it and reflect on it. It's also a point to make here is that it's not bad wherever you are. It's not better or worse. Me joking I'm ahead of you. That's just
Yeah.
me being jokey. It has nothing to do with good or bad. But maybe I'll ask all of us to take a chance and maybe expand on like why we kind of placed ourselves at that point, thinking throughout our lives, how have we looked at vulnerability. Me, I'll go first just because very straightforward. I'm going first. Okay. Starting this podcast, I've always talked about how I've been overly open with my friends, and I tend to do that. I tend to be vulnerable about whatever's going on in my mind. There sometimes are topics that I avoid in my life, whether it's, I don't know, like a conflict with a partner, or if I'm stressing out about something that's a little bit private, it takes me a while to get to a point where I'm being vulnerable. I think there's a time aspect to it as well. I'm not immediately vulnerable about what's going on. I do a bit of reflection first before I am vulnerable, but ultimately I think I end up at a point where I'm completely vulnerable. My best friend, Seb, one of my best friends, Cab's my best friend too, has said before that I wear my heart on my sleeve, right? And I think that's something that kind of, I guess, well encapsulates how I feel about my own vulnerability.
Question.
Yep.
Do you ever feel like you use that as a defense mechanism?
Being vulnerable?
I've actually heard of people who will tell you everything about them at all, like everything they've been through, everything this, that, so that there's no chance of you finding anything about them. And it's kind of like, here's everything about me. Now you can't hurt me because I just told you. It's like kind of like the Eminem, like, I am white. I am.
Right.
So like, do you feel like you ever do that? Or is yours completely just because you feel like it's healthy for you?
I don't think I dump stuff that hasn't been brought up. Like I wouldn't be vulnerable about something unless it was asked about or unless it felt relevant in the moment. I don't unnecessarily be vulnerable.
Okay.
I don't be vulnerable for the sake of vulnerability. You know what I mean? Like it's not that.
Yeah.
I think that when I have a trusting relationship, friendship, whatever, then I'm willing to be vulnerable when asked or in a position to be so. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, answer your
100%.
question. Real quick before all of you share, I want to take a quick moment as well. Audience, if you're listening, this is a good idea to maybe be on the YouTube channel here. Come over and watch what's going on too, because there's a visual to this.
Yeah.
So you probably appreciate it. And just a reminder, subscribe, follow, like,
I'm doing a really
blah,
cool
blah,
dance
blah.
that you're not going to see
And you
if you're
wouldn't
listening.
know. So just a quick reminder. But anyways, Kabir, Jess, Derek, why did you place yourselves where you place yourself on our little chart here?
Should we go in order? So
I'll
Jesse's
volunteer by going last.
Boom.
Wow.
next. You're next, bud.
Do you guys think about this stuff a lot?
I don't think I think about it a lot. I think that
Not at all.
this week I sure
I would
did.
say I do.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you thought about this a lot recently in preparation for the episode?
Only when I came up with the questions 3 days ago.
Mm-hmm. So to me, the reason I put myself so high is I think the way that I understand emotional vulnerability, like I love being emotionally vulnerable. I'm not emotionally vulnerable all the time, I would say. I'm very selective when I'm emotionally vulnerable. But to me, it's like when I get to a place when I believe, and it's usually when I'm connecting with somebody where I can't, whether it's a friend or a partner or whatever, it's like when I'm at a place where I feel emotionally vulnerable, it's usually like when I'm like happiest, or I feel the most like pure and most honest with myself.
Yeah.
So that's the way I understand emotional vulnerability. And I put myself so high up on the list because it's like one of my like top fucking things. Is emotional vulnerability. When you can truly be emotionally vulnerable with somebody who is also being truly emotionally vulnerable. I get that from like you and Joe a lot.
Yeah.
Various people throughout my life have been able to provide it to me, but those that I keep closest, it's usually because there's an element of like, unbridled emotional vulnerability. It means a lot to me.
Because that's the thing when I jokingly earlier was saying I'd call you on your BS if you put yourself very highly. Because I guess the way I look at it is a part of it's frequency, seeing it often. Just because you're not vulnerable often doesn't mean you don't appreciate vulnerability and getting the opportunity to do so, right? Maybe it is more rare for you to get to that point, but when you're there, you love it. That's what it sounds like.
I'm emotionally vulnerable a lot though. Like you're right. Like I don't just do it willy nilly, but
maybe
it's, like,
it's just not with me.
Because when Jesse was the first one to write it down, I was like, "Fuck! I know I'm gonna have to put mine behind his because I think you're more emotionally vulnerable than me by a bit."
Huh?
I feel like we're so much on the same page when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I think like, I mean, based on like the books we read and the way that we talk about it, it's like I've been looking for like one step longer than you have about a lot of the stuff. But it's like always that's why we connect so well. We've been emotionally vulnerable together at times, right? I feel like that's a big part of our trip too. Is like me, Joseph, and I'm sure Jazz Paul as well. You've probably maybe talked to him about it more, but it's like the space that we're in right now as friends, like I mean, the way I see it has come from a place of like emotional vulnerability.
Yeah.
Like I've had these stigmas for a long time. And I mean, us as a group, we're like no new friends. That was our thing for a while, right? It's like we have 21 of us in this group chat. We don't need new friends. And we don't. But you know, for me, having come from that, like just the idea of opening myself up to becoming friends with somebody I don't know, like somebody like Derek, right? It was like, it took like that, like very like niche form of emotional vulnerability to be able to make the connection that we've had. And then from that has come this trip. And like, I mean, from the trip is going to come so much more as long as we stay open to. Yeah.
Cool. Derek, how about yourself then? Why do you feel that you needed to be one step behind there?
I would love to be able to put myself at like the top, but I think that's kind of like not being very realistic because I feel like you can always be more vulnerable. I was listening to this book recently and this quote like blew my fucking mind. It talks about how like when we are vulnerable, like the word vulnerable means that you're like able to be, you're open to be attacked or you're open to be hurt.
To be vulnerable.
Vulnerable?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's okay.
Sorry.
But in reality, the way that we, when at the times that we are vulnerable is when we are like shelling ourselves and not being open. That's actually you being vulnerable because those are the times where you're the most anxious. Those are the times where you're the most like not yourself. And that actually makes you vulnerable to a lot more bad emotions than if you were to open up and just, you know, say how you're feeling or say the things that you've been through. So in the book, it talks about how like you're actually, it is amazing to be vulnerable, but it's actually, you're taking away your vulnerability by showing the true sides of yourself.
I get it.
You know what I mean?
So by being more emotionally vulnerable, you're making yourself less vulnerable like in general.
You're taking all of your power. Like you're, instead of like, it's like when you're playing like have you ever played Jackbox? Yeah. It's like a game like, let's say you're playing charades, right? Like, and then everyone else is going up and being super animated and crazy, and you're like, fuck, like, I don't want to go up. Like, I'm just going to sit here because I don't want to go up and be vulnerable. Like right now in that moment, you're actually super vulnerable because you're sitting there. You're not going with what you actually want to do. You're feeling super anxious. You're feeling super sad. Versus you going up and just being like, fuck it, I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to be silly.
And like you're letting a Jackbox game prevent you from having a good time with your friends.
Yeah. Right. And that's like, that's the definition of vulnerable, because then it's like now you're opening yourself up to, now when you go home, you're going to be thinking about how you sat there and didn't actually play with your friends. They're going to be making all these memories, blah, 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 blah. But if you just go up and do it, it's like you're taking the vulnerability away, because now you're actually taking a step for yourself, and you're taking your own emotions and your own happiness into your own hands by doing what you want to do. It's like that took me a while to grasp.
It's like vulnerability is like a sweet spot before the action outside of your comfort zone. That's the way that I'm hearing that.
Yeah.
It's that moment before taking that new step, that risk.
Yeah. Because
in
like
this scenario,
you think that being vulnerable is going to lead to like so many bad things. But in reality, it's like everybody loves to be around someone who's super fucking vulnerable. It's like, you know, that one friend you have who just like will say like super dumb jokes like Volney or, you know, or whatever. And it's like out of nowhere. And it's
love
like,
that guy.
It's like you love being around those people because it makes you feel like you can be more vulnerable, right? Like everybody always pours their heart out to somebody who pours their heart, who they have reciprocated it, right? So that's why I put myself there, because I feel like I am like almost as vulnerable as I can be, but I still like day to day catch myself like doing certain things that not that I wish I didn't do, but I'm like, I definitely want to work at this. But just being the fact that I recognize it, I'm like way steps ahead of where I used to be.
Wow.
Are we confusing emotional vulnerability with just like self-awareness in general by chance?
I don't know that it's confusing, but maybe they're related.
linked.
Because that's when I was thinking of asking this question about vulnerability and blah, 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 being emotionally vulnerable. To me, it was like how much you are willing to show your emotion and let it kind of pour out. Whereas I find this really interesting that you're saying that. It sounds like, Cabs, you relate to it, and we'll get to Cabs' stance on vulnerability in a second here too. But it's like there's a different way of seeing vulnerability, as though like you're being vulnerable is like appreciating the emotion that you're feeling, it's without necessarily acting on it. It's just being aware of that emotion, self-awareness.
It's not feeling vulnerable emotions. It's being vulnerable to your emotions. Emotional vulnerability.
That makes sense. Let's roll with that.
It's the title right there.
Cool. I like that. Cabs, how about you? Why did you place yourself where you are on
After
that
one pass. I've always been more closed off than emotionally vulnerable, like always. That's just like how it was in my household. I do want to be more like emotionally vulnerable all the time, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's like when I can't see myself being emotionally vulnerable with people I don't know ever. Like I'm emotionally vulnerable with you. And I think that's what makes us like, that's why I enjoy being friends with you. Because I can be my like complete self around you.
What makes you like, are you scared? Like what
why don't you just be more emotionally vulnerable? You know,
that feels uncomfortable to me. Like to be in like a social setting with people I don't know, like like this, like I feel like the podcast is an exception now because I've learned
when you come here.
Yeah, when I'm it's like
cool.
I've learned to be like it's almost like I'm supposed to be emotionally vulnerable here. Like this is the comforting place to be vulnerable.
Safe space.
Like therapy.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that this is therapy, but it's the same concept. It's
Sometimes
like you
it
have
does
now
feel like
associated
therapy,
this place where it's like you're safe and you can talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
So cool, man.
Do you feel like there's any part of you that is less vulnerable until you make a very strong connection with people? It sounds like when you're meeting other people that you're less vulnerable. Here, that's an exception. Meeting Derek for the first time is an exception for you to be able to talk about this kind of thing.
For sure, yeah.
But like, what's that turning point for you? Like, where do you meet a point where it's like, okay, now I am able to be vulnerable with a person? Have you ever thought about that?
So, from time to time, but like I think it's like I have to have almost like a relationship with them for a period of time, whether that's like a few months or like a year. Like even some of our friends in our WhatsApp group, we've been friends for like over 5 years or so. And if I were to hang out with them one-on-one, it'd almost feel like, not like I'm chilling with like a stranger, but like I'd just be kind of like I'd feel most comfortable just kind of making jokes back and forth with them rather than like
small
talking
talk.
about real shit.
I was going to say, cause you said that, you know, like you would feel uncomfortable being emotionally vulnerable. I was going to ask, like, do you feel uncomfortable, like holding in those emotions?
No, I feel comfortable holding in those emotions.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That feels normal to me. I guess just because I've always kind of done it.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't feel like an issue to me.
He's more closed than us.
That I guess fits into what Derek was saying about that moment, or I guess that sweet spot where you're choosing not to share. It's not that you don't have emotion.
Right.
It's just not that you're openly expressing it all the time with every single person. I think that's cool. I think that also goes to what you were saying, Jess, about you have a friendship with somebody and you find it great when you're able to be vulnerable with them. When you hit a point where this person is also vulnerable with me, you appreciate that. It feels like that's the same way for you, right?
For sure.
Maybe you're not maybe it takes even more of a building to get to that point. You know what I mean? Like more time, more of a developed relationship before that vulnerability comes out. Because we've known each other for a number of years and we weren't always as open with each other, right?
Yeah.
Over the last couple of years, it got to that point and now we're here.
Yeah. No, it also helps that you're like super like vulnerable as well.
Do my best for you,
Always
baby.
have been too.
Yeah, man.
Dude, he's number 1 on the list. Did you know?
Hey.
Yeah, I know. Big fucking lead.
But that's the point of the podcast, right? Everybody here who is a fan of this podcast hopefully gets that kind of sense and wants to bring that into their lives too. And it's all incremental. It's step by step. You move your way up over time, right? It's not just an overnight thing. But I want to ask a follow-up question to this, which is, do you think you can be too vulnerable with people? Maybe it's with certain people, say those friends that you aren't necessarily as comfortable with, Cabs. Would you feel like you would be being too vulnerable with those people if you were sharing things that are going on in your real life? Or would it just be not going to it all kind of thing and wouldn't even entertain the idea of it?
Too, like the
people you're not as close. Yeah. Can you be too vulnerable with someone?
I feel like, you definitely can be. Because then like my main thing would be, I'd be worried about the trust because I haven't built trust with those friends essentially. So I'd be worried about, I don't know the scenario where that could become an issue, like the specific scenario, but I'd be worried about, I guess that like if I'm like spilling my heart out to people, I wouldn't want them to like talk to other people about it, you know?
Yeah.
So there was a trust issue there.
What do you guys think? Can you be too vulnerable?
I would disagree. I don't think you can.
No,
because in my mind, at least for me, I don't like to hide like almost anything about myself. Like, for example, like if I were to tell somebody, you know, something about like maybe something that was super traumatizing to me in the past. Like I had my ex-girlfriend in high school, like pretended she got pregnant. It caused me a shit ton of trauma. And like, that made me very sad. It's caused me a lot of like trust issues. But now I've realized that like, that's part of who I am. Like whether I tell you and you tell somebody else, this is the way I feel, is like me not wanting people to know that is kind of like me lying to myself as if it's not a part of the person that I am. Whether that be like you're worried about telling people that you have trust issues and that they're going to use it against you or whatever it may be. To me, I feel the most comfortable and like alive and like in love with myself when I just own my whole life. Because I just feel like it's given me the most peace. Like that when I do that, it's like I feel the best. I'm not doing it because I want you to like, it's great that you know me better now, right. But like for me, this is when I feel like I'm living. Like I could get in a car crash and die tomorrow. It's like I want you to know everything about me. It's like, sure, that's how you build the best connection, right?
I love that. Would you be like that with anybody you meet at any point? Is there any cutoff or like starting point for you where there's grounds to be vulnerable? I mean, I guess you're saying this shit on the internet, right? Yeah. So I mean, I guess not, but you really would just be open like that with anybody.
At least my ideology is that, you know, let's say, okay, I fucked a 50-year-old woman. That's something that genuinely I did, right? And that's something that I used to like not tell anybody about because I didn't want people to judge me.
Sorry, this isn't an example. This is true.
No, this is real.
Oh fuck! I was like, yeah, bro.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I used to lie about it because I didn't want people to judge me. I didn't want to make myself vulnerable to judgment. I didn't want to feel shame. But then I realized I'm like, okay, like why am I hiding this part of me? Because if I do tell somebody this and I make myself vulnerable, because that's me being super emotionally vulnerable, because I'm like, one, I'm super fucking scared. Two, I used to really hate being judged. I'm like, well, if this person judges me and doesn't want to be around me, or they think I'm an idiot, they think I'm a loser, they think I'm fucking sexually frustrated, whatever it may be, I'm like, why would I want them in my life anyway?
Because then why would you want to maintain a friendship or relationship with that person if they're not going to accept everything for who you are?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's almost like, to me, the way I look at things is, earlier I mentioned I might not say something all the time. I don't just be vulnerable for the sake of vulnerability.
Yeah.
I guess the way that I see it is like, there's a time and a place to share a certain thing. Like if I'm with Kabir's example,
I don't open with I fucked a 50-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah, this is an example.
If it comes
of
up,
this
it comes up.
conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would think like if I'm waiting at a restaurant to go and get seated and we're waiting for the rest of the friends to show up and it's just me and the person who I don't talk to often, I'm probably not going to talk a lot about what's going on. I just don't know why. Like I would hold that in. I wouldn't be going on about it. Even if I had something that had been on my mind all day and now I'm here and I'm going to be sitting down for dinner with my friends, I'm still going to be thinking about this thing, but I'm probably not going to bring it up because I wouldn't want to be a bummer if it's a negative thing. You know what I mean? That's maybe part of it to me is like, I don't want to bring my problems to you. I don't want to be vulnerable to you unless it's the right setting. That's kind of the way that I see it too.
But I mean, I don't believe that it is on you to control how someone else takes what you tell them, right? Yeah, I think it's great to be self-aware about how you make other people feel. It's also like, you know, I think that would be the best. Like the way that my life has always gone is that in those moments that I thought that this is going to be too much, I always just find that being vulnerable and just saying like, fuck man, like my girlfriend's been like not replying to me fast enough. Like it's always just creates a better connection. It's never like them being like, dude, stop being a fucking buzzkill. It's always like,
That's
dude,
true.
Same. My girlfriend does that all the time. And then like suddenly you just have all this stuff to talk about, right?
Even as you said that, like I smiled for a second. I was like, oh, I've thought like shit like that before. It's
yeah.
Like, there's a connection there in vulnerability, right?
Like I think it's like just a part of human nature is like the second you see someone else being vulnerable, you want to be vulnerable too.
I feel like most people don't ever really connect like that. Like on like an emotionally vulnerable level.
Like you mean just day to day? Like most people
day-to-day.
aren't being as open as they could be.
It's like, I mean, there are like negative connotations or negative repercussions for like being vulnerable all the time. So I feel like people tend to stay away from it. I feel like if you're further down on this list, you're probably like more inclined to like shying away from that.
And maybe like being further down on the list where you choose to be more closed off, maybe that could even be, and not to say this is you, Kabir, but maybe you have had experiences that have told you not to be vulnerable anymore. Maybe you've been met with judgment, or you've been met with just someone kind of like lashing back or closing themselves off to you after you've chosen to be vulnerable.
I think that's like entirely it. Like the way that I see it, like since I've like accepted that I can feel vulnerable, I can be vulnerable, and kind of like spending time in that and like cherishing that. What I recognize is that like I feel like like if you are not vulnerable, it's things that are in the way of complete openness and vulnerability, which is like the way you want to go. Because if everyone was completely open and vulnerable and everybody understood that, you wouldn't need to protect anything, so you could be vulnerable because nobody's trying to attack you. But that's not how life works. So what we do to survive is we put up these walls that protect our vulnerability, I guess. Right. And we learn how to do that based on our experiences that happen. Right. Like we get yelled at by a parent when we're a kid, or we get yelled at by a friend, or like I feel like the cringiest elementary school example is like you're playing football and like you tackle a kid too hard and like they get hurt. Then it's like for the rest of your life, you may think like, oh, I'm too strong. People, like I'm like, I didn't mean to hurt this guy. Like maybe he's judging me, or his friends are judging me because I hurt this guy by accident. Like, do you know what I was getting at? Like, was I kind of close?
That's like literally like that's like trauma. That's trauma 101.
Yeah,
you know, it's like you learn from.
But my point is, by default, like everybody's open, and that's where you want to aim for. I think. Well, that's where like when I feel like, you know, being vulnerable makes me the happiest is like that's what I experience when I'm like truly vulnerable. But yeah, I'm not like if. Like we said, if being vulnerable means like feeling like vulnerable emotions, like oh, this person can hurt me, and like opening yourself up to that, I don't think you should do that all the time. You can, of course, go overboard with that. But if being emotionally vulnerable means like being open and accepting of all your emotions,
Of yourself.
and not only that, but of others, right? It goes both ways. It's like you accept your emotions and you're vulnerable to your sadness, to your happiness, to your excitement, to everything, and also somebody else's. Then that's when you get like, I mean, like, I feel like we've been good friends for a while now, but like the amount of times Joseph and I have been like sitting in our living room and like experience that together, like just as like roommates and best friends, it's like it's like the best.
Yeah.
When you can find somebody to share that with.
When a kid is sad, a kid cries. When a kid's happy, a kid laughs, right? A kid, to your point of like, our natural state is not to shield these emotions. Whatever a kid feels, they feel it and they show it. You can tell what a kid feels, right? And you'll see these videos of like a little kid and his brother or something, and the brother's sad, and the brother goes and he's vulnerable to the kid and he's like checking in on the brother. Like there's a natural being of being open and emotionally vulnerable, but we learn through trauma or through bad experiences where we were vulnerable to not be. And so the follow-up question I want to ask to that is like, do you feel like people have ever taken advantage of your vulnerability? Do you think people have listened to you be vulnerable? Have you chosen to take that step and go out of your way and leave your comfort zone to share what's been going on and have that turned around and flipped on you? Has that ever happened?
How long do we have for this podcast?
Great question.
Because I feel like that's the thing that will deter you from doing it again, maybe even just with that person. Because this has happened to me in the past. This has happened in previous relationships where maybe I opened up about how I had been feeling, and then I was met with not a great response. From then, I didn't want to open up how I'm feeling, and I've talked about that many times before, as I hesitate a little bit to share what's on my mind. And through counseling, I've gotten better at least saying when something is on my mind. But that was a big hurdle for me. Luckily for me, it didn't deter me from ever being open with people ever again, but maybe for some it could. You know, you have enough bad experiences with being vulnerable, and then you choose not to ever again.
It just takes one.
It can just take one too. It can be a really fucking bad one. It could be your first go, right?
I think the thing that I've learned in dealing with those kind of experiences where you make yourself vulnerable to somebody and it doesn't go the way that you want it to, is one that like your past has nothing to do with your future, right? Like everything that you've gone through, the best way to make things that you've gone through happen again is by thinking about them all the time and trying to avoid them. Like when you keep those things in mind and like, okay, I need to watch out for this person because they might do this to me, or I need to do this, or because I made myself vulnerable that one time, so I'm never going to fucking do it again. That's how you get hurt again, right? And it's really hard to actually like come to grips with that, but I've found that's the best way to, because there's tons of times where I've made myself vulnerable with people and they've judged me, or they've legit just like stopped talking to me. What I've realized is that like, of course that's like everything to do with them and nothing to do with you. And then I, even in those situations of like, you know, you make yourself vulnerable to somebody saying like, hey, I don't like the way this is going. Then they say, well, fuck you. Is this your fucking fault? It's like, even that is everything to do with them and not to do with you. And it's just like, I found like not taking those things personally it's really difficult.
I was going to say that's hard to do.
Yeah, it is. But again, bro, like everyone is doing exactly what they think is the right thing to do at all times. Like even when your ex is fucking yelling at you, like in their head, this is the best thing to do right now. So they're going to do it. That has given me the most peace when it comes to being willing to be emotionally vulnerable, is just knowing that like, I'm going to give myself this service of being emotionally vulnerable, and however this person reacts has nothing to do with me. It may be a reaction based on what the noises that are coming out of my mouth, but that's them. This is me.
We need to try to not let negative experiences deter us from being vulnerable again.
Yeah. Also, even like negative experiences is like, you can look at it any way you want, right? You can look at like me having a psycho ex-girlfriend in high school who told the whole school I got her pregnant. Like I can look at it and be like, yeah, that was a fucking negative experience. But I can also look at it as that gave me a really good radar for liars, right? Like without that experience, I probably would have met someone in a year that would be exactly the same as her. So,
and I've only ever got to experience that as like as a cool, crazy Derek story.
Oh,
because
yeah,
you see it in
yeah.
a positive light. So it's like we get to experience it that way too, because you've made that decision to view it that way, in a more positive light, I guess.
Yeah, and just that's the at least that's the best way to keep those keep that emotional vulnerability like still there and still at like the forefront of your life.
Cabs, do you feel like have you ever, and excuse me for asking,
Finish the question.
No, you knew what I was gonna ask, which was, have you ever felt like you've met like bad experiences with being vulnerable, and has that deterred you from wanting to be more vulnerable?
Not that I mean, I feel like I haven't analyzed my life enough. When we have like these conversations, I feel like I should know more, you know?
No.
Enough that I recall, really. I'm trying to think of like what trauma I may have had that might have caused me to be more closed off, but I can't really think of anything. It just, like, I always felt like more comfortable not sharing.
I feel like in, not to bring up race, but in like brown households, a lot of men, and like not just men, also women, are very shelled and don't show very much of their emotions until it gets to a point of like it builds up, and then it just fucking explodes. Like until then, it's very much like, at least in my experience, entwined in the culture to like, if you're mad, if you're sad, if you're this, it's like hold it in. Like nobody wants to see it.
Yeah, like even you mentioning that, like I like that does make sense, and I know that's a real thing too. Yeah. But I like totally forgot about it. Yeah. Like until you brought it up again.
Don't feel like you should know more about this stuff, but recognize that you're curious, and then be okay with that, because then you'll start looking, and then you might find something that's interesting.
Jesse always says this
I
to
love
me,
that.
But some people never even get to that spot that you're at. So
that's true.
Most people will never even consider it. And that's, I mean, the cool thing about the podcast is like, I mean, there's people that are resonating with it already. And you know, you've been doing it for however long you've been doing it. It's like the idea and the concept, the power and significance behind it doesn't change, right? Is there people that will resonate with this? And like, if one person can watch this and get to a point where they say like, I'm interested in understanding why my brain works the way I am. Like, I'm interested in understanding why I respond certain ways to this. And they start looking, it's like, that's it.
Set them off on the right path.
Set them on the right path, man.
Shit. I like it. Part of the reason why I wanted to ask that question is because I've had like a couple comments show up on some of the TikToks where people have asked, like, what do you do when you've been vulnerable to people and they just leave you? They kind of leave you hanging, you know? And I don't have an answer to that, right? I've been lucky enough and blessed enough to be in a space where people have not left me hanging when I've chosen to be vulnerable with them. I think I got lucky with the friends I've got, you know? Yeah, it just made me think, you know, like that. Imagine you'd be vulnerable to every one of your friends, and every single one of them turns their back on that vulnerability and does not want to be there for you in that moment when you're doing it.
Wow.
I wouldn't want to ask again. I wouldn't want to share a single problem that's going on in my life again. And it might be really hard to even like make new friends at that point, because there's an aspect to friendship that I think involves vulnerability, right? I mean, you two getting as close as you are, as quick as you've gotten, right? Vulnerability is within that, right? Yeah, it's tough.
Especially if it's like, depends on where you're at in life too, right? Like if you're still in school, if you're graduated, if you're in college, it's like making friends is not easy. And I think the way that I've always looked at that is like, if I make myself vulnerable to you and you maybe don't reciprocate, it's like, one, that just shows me that you're not comfortable with your own emotions, or like you're not comfortable with being vulnerable. Like that is, again, like nothing to do with what I'm saying. Like I didn't scare you away, right? I set off something in your head that said it made you feel something that you're not comfortable with expressing or feeling. And if emotional vulnerability is something that you value in yourself or others, and you have somebody, you maybe been friends for like a month, and you take that step and then they X you out, in my head, it's like, oh, great. Good thing I didn't waste 6 more months of my life talking to this person. And then down the line, when I really need somebody, I go to them, and then then they dipped. It's like, well, great.
I want to draw attention to a quote I mentioned a couple episodes back. I think it was the MLK quote about the arc of moral justice in the universe bends toward, or the arc of moral something. Arc of morality bends towards justice in the universe, something like that. But the point of that was that there's a positive trajectory to most of your life. So if you're met with these, this is more specifically to the people who left those comments, like, what do I do when everybody has turned their back to me? Be persistent. Keep taking that next step forward, because you should eventually find people who are going to be open to you, right? Thank God you're not wasting time on them. to Derek's point.
Thank God you're not turning your back on yourself
Mm-hmm.
by not expressing who you actually are and the stuff that you've been through and the way that you're feeling, right? Because like you can just keep yourself closed and be friends with everybody, but it's like you are not friends with anybody. This like image of a human is friends with everybody, and you're still in there in like the back of your brain fucking screaming and crying and laughing and everything, and you're just not allowing it to come out, right? So who would you rather be? It's
that whole like cliche of like, oh, just be yourself, right? Just be you, and people are gonna love you for you. But actually, in a non like dicky way about it, right? Like I didn't ever think of it until this conversation today of it being like vulnerable. That's vulnerability. I've thought of vulnerability differently. I thought about it as being open, but no, it's like recognizing your own emotion and like following through with that emotion. Don't do something counter to it just for the sake of doing it, just to fit in a moment or fit in a group, right? Just follow how you're feeling about something. If you don't want to go out to the club, don't go out to the club.
Yeah. I think Jim Carrey has a quote. He says, being depressed is that you need deep rest from the character that you've been playing. And I'm like, so whoa. I'm like, that's Jim Carrey.
Very Jim Carrey.
What an artist.
Yeah.
I love where Jim Carrey's gone in recent years. He's sick. He's my partner kind of mentioned he kind of went off the Russell Brand kind of way, you know. He kind of found himself a little bit and dipped into the whole spirituality,
like
and
he's finally okay with never being truly understood. Like he's become okay with that and he's leaning into it,
and it's sick. He's loving life.
It seems to be
making people think.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, I love that.
Even if they don't get him, it's like, why is this guy saying these things or thinking like this? Which I think is dope. Spirituality is top tier.
A1.
Maybe even lines up with vulnerability. There's ever a spirituality episode?
There might be very soon. I was planning on doing one actually next week, but see ya.
We'll be sending you our energy.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just be in the van like this.
Channel it.
The last question that I wanted to end things off with is to bring us back to one of the kind of pillars of On Your Mental. This is about getting men to be more open about their mental health and be more open about what's on our minds and be more vulnerable with one another when it is appropriate to be so. And this whole podcast, it's appropriate to be vulnerable. But the reason why I thought On Your Mental was a solid idea was because men typically try not to be vulnerable. Yeah. We try and maintain a facade, right? A character that is stoic. You don't show emotion during tough times. I thought about it recently. I didn't cry when my grandma died. My grandma died, I didn't shed a tear. And when my cat died, I don't remember crying particularly that much. There have been few moments where I've gone through hard times where I cried. Yeah. A lot of it is after the fact, when I'm alone, then in reflection of the incident, then I'm crying. Yeah. Right. And I'm using crying as the emotion or the expression of my emotion in this case. Right. But whatever emotion it is, sometimes maybe you don't even want to be super excited when you get a job promotion. You're going to sit there and be like, oh, yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it. You walk out of the office, you go, fuck yeah, I'm fucking pumped for getting this promotion, whatever it is. Right. Yeah. There's scales to it. Right. It's not all negative. It's not all positive. But in the moment, men are often trying to keep it together, be rather neutral. But that fucking sucks sometimes, man. I want to just like in the moment, like express how I'm feeling. Yeah. But part of me brought up as a man, part of me being brought up as a man has told me not to.
Well, can I ask a question? Do you feel like the way that you processed your, I guess, grief, like with your grandma and your cat was wrong?
I don't think that there's something wrong with it. I didn't think that there's something wrong with it. And even in hindsight, I don't think that there's something wrong with it. One of you two earlier mentioned like when you make the decision to do something, like you're making that decision and you thought it was the right choice. You were saying that like if a crazy ex was like blowing up on you and like saying whatever to you, they thought that was the right thing to do. Yeah. I thought that was the right thing to do too at the time. Yeah. Right. So I'm not going to second guess myself and think back to it. But it's like, I wonder why, you know, like when my cat was being put down, I remember my mom calling me, telling me that it had happened, and she's like crying on the phone, telling me like a little bit like teary and telling me that we put him down, right? Like I was at school, I think, right? And it was just like, okay. Yeah. You know, like
that was the same when my dog got put down. Like the day that she got put down, I did not cry, but like 2 weeks beforehand when I took her to the vet and they told me, I like pulled my car over and just bawled my eyes out. And then when it happened, I was like, you get in that mindset of like, these people around me need someone to look at as the person who isn't crying.
You try to be, and that's the thing, man.
Yeah, which
that's
is not right at all.
Yeah, like why does there have to be somebody in the room who's not being emotional?
Because it's you feel like it'll make you look weak. But if anything, I feel like it makes you so much more relatable and so much more connected to the people around you when you do actually show those emotions. Because a robot is not relatable to anybody. Like even like to some guys, to like dudes who are into girls, a lot of times they'll be very
You're into that type of thing.
They'll be very like shelled and like not vulnerable right away because they don't want to get hurt or they think that they're going to look like a pussy. But like when you start being vulnerable with women, like very like upfront, you'd be surprised how like how refreshing it is to them to see a dude who is like straight up like open about their emotions and like willing to say things about things that they maybe don't identify with anymore, things that they've done, things that they've been through. Like just a robot is so unrelatable, but I totally understand the instinct to not want to show them. It's just life is so much better when you do, you know.
Jess and Cabs, you ever felt that you kind of had to put up this image of being put together and not letting down your emotion? Yeah.
Jess?
Okay, can I bring up a proposition here? Because I think what it comes down to is like, I mean, realistically, like the motivation and like is the sadness or grief or whatever it is being processed, right? Because let's say you're at a funeral or whatever, like stoic dad like is at the funeral with the grandkids and like trying not to cry. Like if dad before the funeral like sat down with his kids and like cried with them and like processed it with them and like that's how they felt they needed to do it. If the processing was done, like there's nothing inherently wrong with like, you know, not crying at a funeral or like remaining. There's actually a lot of value in being able to be somebody who can be stoic in those situations. That is like a very valuable quality, I think. But if you're doing it to hide or hold
Stifle
back,
your
to
own.
stifle the emotions, then that's wrong.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, so the key isn't like not being stoic. It's like processing however you need to so that when the time is right for you to be stoic, you are. It's not you're putting up a front. It's like you are this way, you are okay because you've done the emotional processing. You've talked to the people you've talked to, listened and felt and been where you need to be.
Because I feel like if you are doing it for the sake of being stoic, it's like the opposite of being vulnerable for the sake of being vulnerable.
Exactly.
If you're being stoic for the sake of being stoic,
It's crisscross.
it's a little crisscross.
Crisscross action.
At that point, you're never processing your emotion. You're hindering your own mental health. You're stopping yourself from getting through this moment, and you aren't being vulnerable.
That's it. And that's like most people do that. And it does not, I theorize it does not end well. Like that leads to a lot of problems that I see in like people I know and like older people that I look up to even.
I feel like that can get you to boiling points.
Dude, that's like the people who keep all that like guilt, sadness, and anger inside of them. Those are the people that are getting like sick all the time. The people who are getting injured all the fucking time. Like that shit fucks you up. Like it's not just a thing of I'll keep these emotions inside and like it'll just emotionally damage me. But it's like no, like you physically having all of that shit inside of you is not good at all.
And it's crazy. It's like that, like incels. It's like guys that aren't getting girls are like all they want is to get a girlfriend, right? Or like girls who like stop, like don't want to be hurt by guys anymore, keep getting themselves hurt by guys. It's like you're. I mean, it's like it's
what you were saying. Yeah, it's like when you're thinking about the outcome. You were saying earlier, Derek. It's like the more you think about this thing, the more likely it's going to continue to reoccur and happen again and again.
It's like you don't deserve this. Like continue to live your life. That's how it needs to be. But we get caught up in.
So it's almost like let's say you went through a traumatic experience. Let's say you lose a family member, right? You bottle it up. You don't talk about it. You're still going to keep thinking about it, and until you actually just let that emotion go and like happen to you, it's gonna get worse and worse and worse and worse. And if even you can't let it out, if you can't just sit there and cry or whatever it is that has to happen, fucking write it down. Like put that shit down in a journal. Do something else to get this thing out of there.
Just the physical aspect of emotions is so important. Like that's the advice that I've learned recently, is just like, if you're feeling like anxious, sad, angry, you don't need to burst out crying. You don't need to yell at the person that you're angry at. It's like, if you just sit there and it's like, okay, right now I feel angry. It's like, what is my body feeling? And you just like allow your body, like say you have a knot in your stomach because you're anxious because you're going to do a fucking speech. It's like, you just tell your body like, hey man, like that's fine. You can have this knot in your stomach. Like as long as you need to have it, it's fine. Don't fight it. That's the best way to get through those emotions. Cause that's you like literally feeling it. Like that's like when you're sad is like, what is your body doing? Like, do you feel your eyes getting watery? It's like, tell your body like, bro, it's fine. Like let it through.
Because if you don't do that, it's confusing.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you're a fucking, let's say like a 6'4", super handsome, muscular brown dude. If you feel just as an example, like if you feel something that makes you sad, like to feel something that makes you sad is a very complex thing that's happening. Right? It's chemical stuff going on. There's emotional stuff. There's physical sensations. If you like have gone your entire life without like looking and understanding what that is for you, if you're just like, oh, this is anger, I must be angry.
Yeah.
Right. Then you will always respond with just like you're letting the emotion control you rather than being in control.
Yeah, like I shouldn't be angry right now, or like
Yeah,
I shouldn't be
exactly.
sad. It's like, no.
Right. But it's like, if you just like sit with the anger, it's like, this is what has made me, this is I think what you were getting to. It's like, this has made me angry. This is how I'm feeling. Like, wait a second. Like, oh, what the fuck was I doing? Oh, cool. I just allowed myself to be angry and now I am no longer angry. Great. Yeah. Let's move on and not start a fight. Right.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing with all that is that it is good to, there's a benefit to being stoic, right? And having control over your emotion when the thing is happening. The important thing is to let that emotion happen at some point, right? Do you feel that your mental health has been negatively impacted ever by you not being vulnerable?
I don't know. It's hard to say. That is a really good question.
Yeah, think on it and get back to
in a few days.
Yeah, sure. Actually, genuinely. Yeah, we can go get a drink and then you tell me about it.
Yeah, because I'd have to think about it.
I feel like once you think,
this is opening that door, by the way. This is that whole thing of like deciding to be curious about it.
Remember when I said like it's like my favorite thing? It's because it's that. It's like if you have something there and it's so deep rooted that you've been living with it your entire life, when you find it and you can look at it, it's the best thing. Because like, holy shit, this thing that has been making me feel this way my entire life no longer has that control over me.
It sounds like it's almost fun for you, like finding it too,
bro.
Like looking for it.
Well, it's like it's like I've made a game of self-improvement.
Right. That's like being vulnerable. Is like after you do it enough with people, like it legit becomes a fun game to do with. Like it's like okay, I'm gonna have this conversation with somebody. It's like, let me see how many thoughts I won't shut out. Like how many things I want to reply with that I'm just going to say without even like being like, what if they judge me? What if they do this? Like, it's legit like fun. Like I used to say, like, I like it now when people don't like me because that means in that moment I did not care about them not liking me. Cause if I really want people to like me, it's like, I can make you fucking like me because I know all the things to say and the things to do. But now that I
blue check mark, I get you to close.
Now I just tell people that I bought the followers.
It's funny actually hearing you say that, Derek, is people who listen and watch this podcast, go check out Derek's TikTok, because there have been moments where I'm watching your TikToks where the little clips in your pocket and it's like, I wouldn't have the balls to ask that. I would would want to censor myself. I would want to keep that shit to myself. That would be a thought that I would have and I would want to ask, but I wouldn't.
Like the Voros twins,
cool
I was like, are you guys really that fucking stupid?
I was like, I would never.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like you'd be further on that scale than I am when I think about that. I got to move myself down, maybe. I don't know. But
everyone has their own ways that they
own
strive and
that.
Yeah.
You moving cabs up a little?
Whoa.
He's writing, please like and subscribe. Interesting. Maybe you guys should do that.
What'd you do there?
I just gave Cabs a little heart because I love you.
Thanks
for being emotional.
Beautiful.
Vulnerable, guys.
Beautiful. Jesse, Derek, Cabs, welcome back, buddy. Nice to have you here this
welcome
week.
back, bro.
Hey, thanks.
I'm so glad you're back.
I'm gonna pretend like I knew that you left. So welcome back.
Ultra music festival.
Oh fuck!
It was
That's
so
probably a
sick.
whole
For sure.
podcast in
Oh.
itself.
Can you guys do an ultra recap episode?
Dude, an ultra recap episode while on Molly.
All right. So here's a sneak peek for next week's episode and what I hope to do.
Oh, cool. Recap.
So next week's episode, awfully close to a particular date, 4/20. Originally, I was thinking I wanted to have a little stoner session. I wanted to see if something happens, but we've tried that before, admittedly, and it does not work so far. It's a little hard to keep on track. But what I wanted to dive into on the topic of spirituality and a little bit about higher self is psychedelics and the use of psychedelics. I wanted to dive into that. It wasn't Dan. I love acid. But that's something that might be in next week's episode. We'll see if it actually ends up being the topic. But I got to see if people are willing to come and talk about it. I will be. But I got to see if people are willing to come and talk about it, because I know that that's something that maybe people don't want to share about themselves on the internet.
Well, maybe they need to be a little bit more emotionally
vulnerable. Derek, Jesse, thank you so much for coming in this week. I really appreciate y'all being here. I hope everybody listening and watching enjoyed this week's episode. I think that I'm actually going to really enjoy going back and listening to this and just taking those nuggets again. So I hope all of you, as you listened, you picked out some pieces where you can take this into your life. Practice some more emotional vulnerability. Feel better about yourself and being who you are.
And I hope you guys like and subscribe.
Yeah. Again, thank you very much. If you missed it at the start of the episode, because I'll say it there too, like and subscribe. I'll also thank, because I will have said this at the start, I will also thank again people who left comments and left questions in our DM on Instagram after last week's episode. We actually got a pretty solid list going of some questions to run off of for some future episodes. So looking forward to that. Anyways, hope you all enjoyed. We will see y'all next week with another episode. Peace.